Hi, I'm Dr. Priya Stelameri, Assistant Professor in Data Science, St. Joseph's College, Trichy. In this video, I'm going to give you a basic introduction to correlation. The content of this video are: so what is correlation and what is correlation coefficient, what are all the basic types of correlation, and understanding of correlation through scatter diagrams. Correlation. So correlation is a statistical measure used to identify the relationship between two or more variables. These variables may be either quantitative variables or qualitative variables. Mathematically, we can express correlation by means of correlation coefficient. A correlation coefficient is a number that lies between -1 and +1. It provides the strength and direction of a relationship between variables. There are three basic types of correlation, namely positive correlation, negative correlation, and zero correlation. We can understand different types of correlations through scatter diagrams. A scatter diagram is a very useful graph to represent the correlation between two quantitative variables. So let us assume that we have four pairs of values of variables x and y as shown in this table, and they are represented by points x1, y1, x2, y2, x3, y3, and x4, y4 in the Cartesian plane as shown in the graph. So this graph is more useful for displaying the relationship between two quantitative variables, namely x and y. Let us see some examples through which we can understand the correlation through scatter diagrams. Example 1. So let us consider 6 babies of 12 months, 13 months, 14 months, 15 months, 16 months, and 17 months old. We are going to find whether the vocabulary of these babies increase as they grow up. Consider the sample data. The ages of babies are represented by the variable x. The vocabulary of babies are represented by the variable y. Now we are going to plot these values in the scatter plot. Ages of babies in x-axis and vocabulary of babies in y-axis. Now start plotting the points. 12-month baby learns 5 words, 13-month baby learns 10 words, 14-month baby learns 15 words, 15-month baby learns 20 words, 16-month baby learns 25 words, and 17-month baby learns 30 words. So when we join all these points, we can notice that all the scatter points lie on an upward sloping straight line, which implies there exists a perfect positive correlation between the variables x and y. Which means when a child grows older, the vocabulary of the child expands. So that is the interpretation we can arrive at from this diagram. Consider example number 2. So now we are going to find whether the working time of the persons influences their free time or not. So consider the following sample data. The working time is represented by the variable x and free time is represented by the variable y. Now plot these values in the scatter plot. The working time in x-axis and free time in y-axis. Again start plotting the points. As per the sample data, a person who works for 12 hours is having 1 hour free time. A person who works for 11 hours is having 2 hours free time. A person who works for 10 hours is having 3 hours free time. and a person who's working for 9 hours is having 4 hours free time. A person who's working for 8 hours is having 5 hours free time. And finally, a person who's working for 7 hours is having 6 hours free time. When we join all these points, we can notice that all the scatter points lie on a downward sloping straight line, which implies there exists a perfect negative correlation between the variables x and y, which means when a person works more, he or she will be having only a minimal amount of free time. Consider the third example. So we are going to identify whether the intake of coffee by individuals increases their IQ levels or not. So consider the following sample data. Intake of coffee in ml, that is milliliter, is represented by the variable x. IQ levels are represented by the variable y. Again, plot the values in the scatter plot. Coffee in x-axis and IQ levels in y-axis. Now start plotting the points as per the sample data. A person who drinks 125 ml of coffee is having IQ level 90. A person who drinks 500 ml of coffee is having IQ level of 100. A person who drinks 375 ml of coffee is having IQ level of 85. A person who drinks 625 ml of coffee is having IQ level of 95, and a person who is drinking 750 ml of coffee is having IQ level of 78. A person who is drinking 250 ml of coffee is having IQ level of 80. We cannot join all these points using a straight line, but we can draw a line that passes closer to most of the points plotted in this graph. Ultimately, we get a horizontal line, which implies there exists no correlation between the variables x and y. And now, what is the interpretation? It means there exists no relationship between the intake of coffee and the IQ level of the persons. So let us see the merits and demerits of scatter plots. First, we shall see the merits. Identifying correlation through scatter plot is very simple. Unlike most mathematical methods, scatter plots are not affected by the presence of outliers. It is a non-mathematical method of studying correlation between the variables. Now we shall see the demerits. Scatter diagrams are useful to find only the direction of correlation. The exact degree of correlation between the variables cannot be found. So interpretation of scatter plots is subjective. Scientists often deploy the statistical measure correlation while conducting research and tests to identify the meaningful relationship between variables so as to obtain new insights and interdependencies. Yes, thanks for watching. The next video, we shall see how mathematical methods can be employed to find the correlation perfectly. Thank you so much.